So you watched Raiden's basics guide. Now you're wondering what kind of teams we can use her in. So in this video, that's what we're going to do. We are going to look at some teams for Raiden. If you are wondering how Raiden's kit works, check this video out. I hope I remember to put that there. If not, it's going to be funny. Now, we are first going to start off with the team that I was using in her basics guide, and that is going to be Raiden, C6 Sara, C1 Chevy, and C6 Benny. Now in this video, I do not talk about Raiden National Team. That is kind of like a staple team whenever it comes to running an on-field Raiden. And I wanted to talk more about some other options. There are plenty of videos out there talking about the Raiden National Team. I will make one day, but I wanted in this video to talk more about some other options that you may have not considered. But I know that somebody is gonna make a comment like, oh, you didn't talk about Rational whenever this is a Raiden team video. I wanted to just put that out there at the beginning. Let's get into it. Now this is my go-to Hyper Raiden team. Hyper Raiden being that she is the main damage dealer, right? The other three are going to be there giving support and healing and things like that, so that way she can do more damage. Now this team, you can use somebody else other than Chevy. Chevy came along and allowed for this team to actually work. If you want to use the traditional Hyper Raiden team, we're going to talk about that in just a second. Now the good thing about this team is that we are going to be using Raiden to kind of battery the rest of the team to let them use their burst, so that way we can charge the resolve stacks onto Raiden, so that way her burst can do more damage. We're going to be causing overloader reactions, so that way we can get Chevy's buff or make the enemies weaker to Electro and Pyro. We're going to be using Chevy's hold skill with Songs of Days Past, so that way we're getting even more damage over to Raiden. And then we're going to be using C6 Benny for an attack buff, Sara for an attack buff, C6 Sara for an Electro crit damage buff. We're going to be giving so much damage buffs over to Raiden that is going to allow her to do a lot of damage. Now the one thing that I would say is negative about this team is that there is no grouping, which you would get if you were to replace Chevy with the original person for the Raiden Hyper Carry team, but it also knocks the enemies back a little bit unless they're larger and they can't be knocked back from the overloaded. And if you're fighting multiple waves of enemies where they're kind of spawning in the middle of her burst, if you haven't caused an overloader reaction on those enemies, they're not going to have their Electro resistance dropped. So this team does typically work better against enemies that are single or double, where they're going to be on field longer, and you can cause overloader reactions continuously through your rotation versus enemies that are going to spawn in. Now I do like this team though, because I do have two healers. I do have Chevy and I do have Benny, so I never really have to worry about anybody dying. I don't have to worry about anybody getting super low on HP. And Sara, I was also running on Emblem, so she was still hitting like an extra 100k. That was just kind of adding to the damage total. I've actually tried to swap Sara over to the Natlan set, and while she won't be able to get the full buff over to Raiden, it's still going to give like a 12% more Electro damage bonus over to Raiden, so it should help make her a little bit stronger. I'm going to see if that little bit is going to compensate for losing damage on Sara, but if I just get good rolls on the artifacts, Sara will still be able to do plenty of damage on her own, so it should be worth it. Now, I don't know if I'm going to recommend putting Sara on that artifact set yet. I just know that I'm testing it out right now. This is a team that I have used in the Abyss countless times. I freaking love this team. It's one of my favorites. I really wanted Chevy originally. I didn't even necessarily want Raiden. I was going for Chevy, and if you know, it took me over 200 wishes to get C0 Chevy, and in the process I got Raiden. So it wasn't like a bad thing. I do really enjoy this team. Raiden's not even like one of my favorite characters, but she's one of my better built teams, which is probably because it's a more niche Hyper Raiden team. And I mean, if you watch my content, you know I love the niche teams. I'm a Dia main and a Nilu main, so like of course I'm gonna like the niche stuff. Now, if you want to run the original Hyper Raiden team, then we're going to take out Chevy and we're going to put in Kazuha. This does give grouping, and this is going to give damage bonus over to Raiden based on Kazuha's EM, and it's going to give VV swirl, right? So we're going to make the enemies weaker to Electro. So this can be a really good option. I do hit higher with Chevy than Kazuha because I have more of a buff from Chevy than EM on Kazuha. That's another reason why I run Chevy over Kazuha. But you do get the grouping, you do get the extra swirl, and if you can swirl Electro, then enemies spawning into it, if they're hit with that swirling Electro, then it will make them weak to it because of the VV shred. So there is a benefit to having Kazuha over Chevy. The benefit to having Chevy over Kazuha is that you don't need 2 5-stars in one team. You can do 3 4-stars and Raiden, and then Kazuha can go to somebody else. and another team in the Abyss, right? Which is what I really wanted because I like running Dia and Farina together. That's one of my other really well built teams, and Kazuha slots into that team phenomenally. Now we're gonna talk about a kind of variation to this Hyper Raiden team. We're gonna take it from a Hyper Raiden team to a double damage dealer team, and we're almost going to be using Raiden as a support and a battery, and that is going to be another Chevy overloaded team, but it's going to be Raiden, Dia, Chevy, and Bennett. So in this team, we are going to be doing the same thing. We're going to be causing overloaded reactions. Dia's punches work with Raiden's skill, so even enemies that spawn in are going to have their resistances dropped. We're still going to be able to use Chevy and Benny to buff Dia and Raiden. And essentially what we're going to be doing with this is that we're going to be using Raiden's skill to make Dia's burst stronger. We're going to be using Chevy's kit to make Dia and Raiden stronger. We're going to be using Benny's kit to make them stronger. And we're going to be using Dia to, her burst is going to give stacks over to Raiden, dealing a ton of damage in the process, at least my Dia does. And then we are going to be using Dia's burst to also charge the stacks for Raiden's burst. Raiden we're going to bring onto the field whenever we have a full resolve stack, a full ring on the back, and when we need to battery Dia, who does have ER issues. So we can kind of use them in conjunction, right? Raiden's skill is going to make Dia stronger. Dia's burst is going to charge Raiden's burst. Raiden's burst is going to give energy to Dia. So it's a very synergetic team. It's one that I really like as well. It's a very fun team to use. If you don't have Dia, or your Dia's not built or something like that, you can of course swap Dia out to somebody else. You can swap in Arlecchino, you could use Klee, you could use Xiangling, you could use Diluc, you could use really any other damage dealer that is Pyro or even Electro. You could go to maybe like Kaching, you could use maybe like Sethos, although Sethos really wants aggravated reactions or spread reaction. No, it'd be aggravated for him. Aggravated reactions. So you can slot, if you don't have C6 Sara, which is what this team kind of does, is that it takes your ability to use Raiden as a damage dealer and a support without needing C6 Sara, which in my opinion is the thing that keeps a lot of people from running Hyper Raiden, or doesn't allow them to run Hyper Raiden in a way that they would want. Not having C6 Sara, you can still run an on-field damage dealing Raiden in a team like this. You just need another damage dealer kind of in there, right? We're dropping Raiden's damage and we are increasing the team's damage. In this instance, my Dia replacing the C6 Sara. So it takes it more from a Hyper Raiden to a double on-field DPS Raiden Chevy team. And you could possibly do it with Kazuha. I think it works better with Chevy though, because you could just have another Pyro character, another Electric character that's damage dealing, and slot them in, and it's going to work flawlessly. You don't have to worry about your rotation as much, like what element am I swirling with Kazuha. I need to make sure that I'm swirling the element that I'm going to get the damage from. You can just use Dia, go through your rotation, use Raiden, go through your rotation, use Dia, go through. It's not going to be as difficult as using, like, trying to try the same thing with Kazuha. Now the next team that we're going to look at is actually going to start getting into the Dendro element. So this is going to be a Hyperbloom Raiden. Now just so you know, I have never actually put artifacts onto my Raiden for Hyperbloom. I've always used Kuki for my Hyperbloom trigger. So we are going to give Raiden my Demon Yao Yao set, which is going to be 2-piece Gilded, 2-piece Wanderer's Troop for double EM. And then of course we're going to give her like Dragon's Bait. And we're going to actually get over 1100 EM on Raiden. Yes, my Yao Yao has over 1100 EM on her for Bountiful Core. Now in this team, we are going to be using something like, I'll hate them as an on-field Dendro applicator, Raiden only for her skill. We're not going to be using her burst in this team. Then of course we need Hydra, so we're going to have Xingqiu, which is going to work great with Alhaitham. And then we're going to have Nahida to kind of give Dendro's Shred. We're going to use her to give up give EM to our other characters, but we are going to put Prototype Amber on her to give it a little bit of healing. This is only going to be using Raiden's skill, where we are going to be letting Raiden's skill trigger the Hyper Blooms, right? So it's going to be a really good team. You can, of course, take Alhaitham out and put an on-field Hydro Driver instead of Xingqiu, and then just use Nahida for your off-field Dendro application. So then you could do like a Yato, or you could do Nuvolette, Raiden, Nahida, and then you could just do like Farina. right? And that's going to be another really, really good team, especially with Nuvolette, because it's going to be Hyperbloom, and Nuvolette is going to be still doing a ton of damage like he always does. Now, this is a pure Hyperbloom team where we're not necessarily worried about Alhatham's damage, right? He's not going to be getting any quicken, any spread reactions. He's only going to be doing with Xingqiu, he's going to only be doing Dendro to create blooms for Raiden to Hyperbloom them. So the majority of your damage is going to be coming from the Hyperblooms, not necessarily from Alhatham himself. If we wanted to turn this more into a quick bloom team, which is slightly different from a Hyperbloom team, then we would decrease our Hydro application and we would put Farina in instead of Xingqiu, keeping Nahida on prototype Amber so that way her burst would still heal a little bit. Or you would take Nahida out and you would swap in Baizhu. Baizhu is going to heal the team. Baizhu is going to do a lot of healing so that way he can work with Farina. This is going to be a lot slower of a Hydro application, allowing Alhatham to get some spread reaction, turning it from a pure Hyper Bloom team into a Quick Bloom team. And I do run a Quick Bloom team with Alhatham, but that's not for this video because that's a crazy niche team. I will do a video on that team though, because it's becoming one of my favorites very quickly. Now, if we were to want to make a pure spread aggravate team, then we would do things a little bit differently. I am going to swap Raiden back over to her emblem set, her on-field damage dealing set, and we're going to use a team of Sethos, Raiden, C4 or C6, Kirara, and then Kazuha. What we're going to be doing is that we're going to be swirling the Electro coming from Raiden, so that way we can get the VV Shred, make the enemies weaker to it, give a damage boost for Electro. We are going to be using C4 or C6, Kirara, her shield to get that coordinated Dendro attack to keep the enemies with the Quicken Aura, so that way Raiden and Sethos can cause aggravated reactions. Now, this is a team that I've run before, but instead of Raiden, I have actually used Fischl to battery Sethos. In this team, we would be using Sethos Burst, so that way it can then charge Resolve stacks. Then whenever Sethos needs energy, then we just go back to Kirara, make sure that we have her shield up, make sure that we've swirled recently, use Raiden's Burst to then charge up the rest of the team's bursts, dealing a fair good amount of damage, then allowing for Sethos to come back onto the field and then use his burst and get a ton of these aggravated reactions that he gets because he shoots his electro arrows very, very fast with his normal attacks during his burst. This is a very interesting team. This is, again, another team where if we don't have C6 Sara, we could do a team like this. I think instead of Kazuha, if you didn't have Kazuha, you could use like Kachina with the Natlan set that's going to give damage bonus over. I think that you could slot Kachina in and still get a fair good amount of damage buff and a little bit of an extra shield. Not going to get the grouping though, which Sethos can like and Raiden can like. But that's just a couple of teams and some variations that you can do with Raiden. That is going to be it for this video. If you have any questions, do be sure to leave it down in the comments. Myself or someone else should answer it. I'll see you in the next one.